The air is thick with smoke. A priest, his face hidden in shadow, presses a bronze poker heated to a glowing red into a meticulously polished tortoise shell. For a moment, there is only the hiss of extreme heat. Then, a sharp, violent crack echoes through the chamber. The king leans forward, his eyes fixated on the new spiderweb-thin fracture. On that single, jagged line, the fate of an army, the success of a harvest, and the very future of his dynasty will be decided. In the fertile plains of the Yellow River over 3,000 years ago, China's first great dynasty, the Shang, ruled with absolute power. They were kings, warriors, and high priests, but they lived in a world of constant anxiety. Their universe was not empty. It was swarming with the spirits of their ancestors, nature deities, and a high god. These invisible forces controlled everything: the rain, the success of a hunt, the outcome of a war, the health of the king. To rule was to navigate the whims of this spiritual world, and a wrong step could mean disaster. The Shang kings needed a way to speak to these powers, to ask for guidance, to demand answers. They needed a direct line to the divine. And they found it in the most unlikely of materials: the bones of beasts and the shells of tortoises. This was not simple fortune-telling. It was the bedrock of their political and religious system. The process, known as pyromancy, was a sacred and meticulously controlled ritual. Royal diviners would first collect the shoulder blades of oxen or, more importantly, the flat plastrons, the undershells of tortoises. These were carefully cleaned, scraped, and polished until smooth. Then, on one side of the bone, small pits or hollows were drilled. On the opposite side, the king's diviner would inscribe the topic of the charge, the question being posed to the ancestors. These weren't idle queries. They were matters of life and death. Will the queen's pregnancy yield a son? Should we sacrifice 100 prisoners of war to the river god? Is the king's toothache a curse from ancestor Jia? With the question posed, the ritual would reach its climax. A priest would take a heated poker of bronze or wood and press it into the hollowed-out pits. The intense, focused heat would cause the bone to crack, producing a sharp, definitive sound, often in the shape of the character for divination. This crack was not a random event. It was the voice of the spirit world made visible. The king himself, as the chief diviner, would interpret the shape, length, and direction of these fractures to decipher the answer auspicious or inauspicious, yes or no. The will of the ancestors had been revealed. This practice gave the Shang king unimaginable power. He was the sole conduit, the only man who could interpret these divine messages. His decisions were no longer just his own. They were the sacred commands of his deified ancestors. To question the king was to question the gods themselves. But the true genius of the oracle bones, the part that transformed them from a mere ritual tool into a world-changing technology, came after the ceremony. Scribes would take the cracked bone and carve a permanent record of the entire event. They would note the date, the name of the diviner, the question that was asked, and sometimes, weeks or months later, they would even carve the outcome whether the prediction came true. The spirits approved the sacrifice, and the rains came. We attacked the Fang state as the cracks commanded, and we were victorious. In doing this, the Shang created a library of their interactions with the supernatural. They were creating data, tracking the reliability of their ancestors' advice. More importantly, these carved inscriptions were the very first form of Chinese writing. Each pictographic character was a direct link between a word and an idea. This was not a language for poetry or commerce. It was a sacred code, born from fire and used exclusively to communicate with the dead. For centuries, these bones were the secret archives of the Shang kings. When the dynasty eventually fell, these royal records were lost, buried in pits for millennia, their existence fading into myth. It wasn't until 1899 that they were rediscovered, not by archaeologists, but by a scholar who was sick with malaria. He bought what he thought was a traditional Chinese remedy called dragon bones, only to notice the ancient, systematic carvings on them. He had stumbled upon the lost voices of China's first kings, proving that the Shang Dynasty was not just a legend, but a complex and powerful civilization that built its empire on a code of burnt bone. The secrets of the Shang were written in bone, but their writing system would evolve into the script we know today. Centuries later, the man who would unify that script and all of China, Qin Shi Huang, sought a very different kind of immortality. The secrets of this first emperor weren't burned for the gods to see, but were buried with him, deep underground, guarded by an army of 8,000 silent soldiers. A terracotta army protecting a tomb no one has dared to open.